Elon Musk went from billionaire innovator to courtroom critic, slamming Judge Boasberg and Chief Justice Roberts in a way that left the country completely stunned. You're watching the slow death of democracy right in front of your eyes. That was the first line Elon Musk posted on X at 6:03 a.m. No fluff, no hashtags, just that sentence. Within minutes, it had been shared over 200,000 times. An hour later, cable news was buzzing about it. But it wasn't just a cryptic rant. This was Musk targeting the courts, more specifically one judge, James Boasberg. Now, most people didn't even know who Boasberg was, a federal judge sitting in Washington, D.C., quiet, procedural, never one for headlines. But all of that changed overnight. What sparked the fire? It was a ruling Musk believed crossed the line. Boasberg had just issued a temporary block on the Trump administration's plan to deport a group of Venezuelan nationals tied to organized crime. The legal ground for the plan was the Alien Enemies Act, a dusty, rarely used piece of legislation from 1798. Musk didn't see it as a legal debate. He saw it as sabotage. This isn't about law anymore, he posted the next morning. It's about judges rewriting the rules to fit their ideology. Enough. And that's when the story stopped being about a court case and became a war of ideology. It all started in Spokane, Washington, oddly enough. That's where Elon happened to be that week, checking in on a new battery facility under construction. At a private dinner at the Davenport Hotel, one of his aides, a man named Kelvin Reddick, handed him a stack of press clippings. Elon didn't even read them at first, but when he saw the headlines, Judge blocks Trump order on deportations, and then the footnote about the Alien Enemies Act, he sat back, put his glass down, and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Kelvin was used to Elon's reactions, but this wasn't one of those fleeting frustrations that blew over. This was different. "You're going to tweet about it?" Kelvin asked. "No," Elon said, eyes still fixed on the screen. "This one's personal." Back in D.C., Judge Boasberg didn't flinch. His ruling was grounded in precedent. The defense argued that the use of the Alien Enemies Act, especially on asylum seekers, could violate multiple international treaties. He agreed, temporarily, just long enough for the appeals to come in. But Musk wasn't interested in legal nuance. He saw the whole thing as elite obstruction, judges ignoring the safety of American citizens to protect foreign criminals. He told a group of reporters in Yakima, they're not elected, they're not accountable, and they're playing games with national security. His words hit hard with conservative voters and fueled round-the-clock segments on right-leaning networks. Boasberg's name, once unknown, was now trending. What made things worse was how carefully Musk picked his targets. He didn't lash out at random. He focused. His next post tagged Chief Justice John Roberts. "When you let judges like Boasberg run wild and you say nothing, you're complicit," Musk wrote, directly referencing Roberts. "Silence from the mob is how systems rot." Inside the Supreme Court, Roberts read that line 3 times. He's a man known for his poker face, but according to a clerk present that day, he took off his glasses, rubbed his forehead, and said quietly, "We're heading into dangerous territory." See, Roberts believes deeply in preserving the court's image, not for ego but for the institution. And for a man who rarely engages with public spats, the pressure was mounting. Meanwhile, Elon doubled down. In a private call with a Texas senator, who later leaked parts of the conversation, Musk urged lawmakers to begin drafting mechanisms to remove judges who act politically. The idea? Impeachment. Wild? Maybe. But this was Elon Musk. He wasn't just talking. He wanted action. And for better or worse, he was dragging the entire judicial system into the public arena. But behind those headlines, in quiet chambers and private offices, the pushback was building, and it was about to get loud. The morning after Musk's posts went viral, Judge Boasberg's office was flooded, not with legal motions, but voicemails, emails, letters, threats. Some were just angry rants from citizens who barely understood what the Alien Enemies Act even was. Others were more serious. One email simply read, "Traitor in robes." Another included the names of his children and their school schedule. U.S. Marshals were quietly dispatched to increase security at the E. Barrett Prettyman Courthouse in D.C., though there was no official announcement. The judge didn't release a statement. He didn't need to. The system was already grinding its wheels, and every law clerk in the building knew. This wasn't just backlash, it was a signal. The courts were under fire. Across the country, in a modest law office in Flagstaff, Arizona, a retired federal prosecutor named Harold Beechman watched the news coverage with growing disbelief. Harold wasn't famous, never wanted to be, but he'd spent 30 years defending the independence of the judiciary from every kind of political pressure. He had watched cases fall apart, lives change, verdicts ruin careers. And through all of it, he believed one thing: if the courts bend, the country breaks. His wife, Gloria, handed him a cup of black coffee and sat beside him on their worn leather sofa. "He's not wrong, you know," she said quietly, "about judges being too powerful sometimes." Harold sighed. "Maybe, but you don't tear down the house just to fix a leaky pipe." He didn't know it then, but Harold's voice would become one of the loudest in the days to come. Meanwhile, back in Washington, John Roberts was trying to craft a response. Carefully, deliberately. This wasn't a battle he wanted to fight, but silence was beginning to feel like surrender. He summoned two of his longtime advisors to his chambers, Marin Fielding, a constitutional historian, and Charles Redd, a retired appellate judge who had once clerked for William Rehnquist. Roberts looked tired but calm. "If I say nothing, I look weak. If I say too much, I drag the entire court into the mud," he said, looking between them. Charles leaned forward. "You've spent 2 decades defending restraint. Don't stop now. Say what needs to be said. Just don't turn this into a spectacle." And so, that afternoon, a statement was released. Disagreement with judicial rulings is expected in a functioning democracy. But disagreement must be addressed through legal argument and the appellate process, not public campaigns of discredit and intimidation. It was classic Roberts, neutral, reasoned, but clear. Of course, Musk wasn't impressed. He reposted the statement with a single word: cowardice. In the small town of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a teacher named Camille York sat at her kitchen table grading midterms when her phone buzzed. Her cousin had sent her a video, a news segment showing Musk's comments, intercut with images of protesters outside courthouses holding signs that read, "Impeach the elites and judges don't own us." She watched it 3 times, not because she agreed, but because it felt surreal. Her older brother had once been sentenced by a federal judge. Harsh sentence, years in prison. At the time, she was angry too. But this felt like it had crossed a line. She didn't know if Musk was dangerous or just loud. Either way, she could feel something shifting. Even her 9th graders had started asking questions during civics class that week. Can rich people fire judges now? And that question lingered in her mind for days. In Austin, Texas, a young congressional staffer named Theo Nunes was having his own crisis. His boss, Representative Martin Greaves, had just gotten off a call with Musk's team. Elon wanted to meet. "The courts are hijacking democracy," Musk had told him. "We need a mechanism. Checks and balances don't work when one branch refuses to answer to anyone." Theo didn't speak during the call, but the whole thing made his stomach turn. He respected Musk's intelligence. Everyone did. But Theo also believed in the Constitution. And in that moment, it felt like both were crashing head-on. Later that night, he texted a friend from law school. "What happens if the people with the biggest microphones convince everyone the system's broken, even if it isn't?" She didn't reply for a long time. Then it becomes broken. But the real test wasn't going to be tweets or protests or panels. It was coming in the form of a decision from a man who rarely made public waves, and he was ready to speak. 3 days after Musk's last post, Chief Justice John Roberts stood behind a podium at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. It wasn't supposed to be a headline-making speech. Originally, he was invited to give a lecture on constitutional interpretation. But the second he cleared his throat, the silence in the room felt different. He glanced at his notes, then set them aside. "I want to begin by saying something that shouldn't need saying," he said then slowly. "Judges are not politicians. We don't campaign, we don't trade in popularity. We interpret the law." He paused, letting that settle. "There is no dignity," he added, "in dismantling institutions because they occasionally yield outcomes you don't like." The message was unmistakable. No names, no direct finger pointing, but everyone knew who it was for. That clip was all over the news that night. On some channels, Roberts was praised as a voice of reason. On others, he was mocked. Out of touch, weak, slow to act. Musk's supporters called the speech a lecture from a man in a marble tower. And while Musk himself didn't respond publicly, an insider close to him, an outspoken investor named Bryce Lennox, posted a short video recorded from inside his Tesla. "Let me get this straight," Bryce said, leaning toward the camera. "We've got foreign gang members being protected, judges saying they're above criticism, and a Supreme Court that thinks the real threat is mean tweets? Give me a break." That video got over 14 million views. Meanwhile, tension was spreading offline. In St. Augustine, Florida, a federal building received a suspicious package. In San Diego, a judge's home was surrounded by angry protesters carrying American flags and megaphones. And in Des Moines, a courthouse was evacuated after a bomb threat turned out to be fake, but terrifying nonetheless. But for all the noise, something deeper was starting to take hold. People weren't just angry, they were divided. Families were arguing at dinner tables. Schools were fielding complaints about what civics teachers were telling students. At a diner in Pueblo, Colorado, a waitress named Adriana Lockett overheard two regulars arguing over Musk's comments. "He's got the guts to say what we're all thinking," said one man, sipping black coffee. "These judges, they don't answer to nobody." His friend across the booth shook his head. "They're not supposed to. That's the point. They're there to keep people like Musk in check." The waitress didn't say anything out loud, but she carried their plates back to the kitchen, wondering which one of them had it right. Inside the Beltway, a political storm was brewing. Senator Glenn Warfield from Nebraska took to the Senate floor with a fiery speech. For decades, the American people have watched the courts hijack their will. Now someone finally has the courage to speak up, and the elites are panicking. "We need judicial accountability. We need term limits. We need options." He didn't say the word impeachment, but he didn't need to. Just down the hall, Representative El Moreno, a progressive from Oregon, called a press conference of her own. Standing in front of a crowd of reporters, she fired back. "What we're witnessing is not reform, it's retribution. Elon Musk is not the voice of the people. He's the voice of unchecked power. And if we don't stand up to it now, we may not get another chance." The lines were drawn. In Baltimore, a high school civics teacher named Justin Polanski watched both speeches with his 11th grade class. They were confused, angry, curious. One student asked, "Can billionaires just get rid of judges now?" Another whispered, "Why should we care about a judge we didn't even vote for?" Polanski didn't have easy answers, but he posed a question in return. What happens if judges do become afraid to make unpopular decisions? A long silence followed. Then one student, a girl named Kayla, said, "Then they'll stop protecting people like me." That stuck with him. But outside the classroom, far from the headlines and the protests, a smaller story was taking shape. One that would give the entire country a window into what was really at stake. It was raining in Topeka, Kansas. A slow, steady rain that made everything feel heavy. Inside a modest brick building near the state capitol, 38-year-old court liaison officer Nina Belden was typing up her final case report of the day when her office phone rang. She hesitated. It was after 6. Calls after hours usually meant trouble. "This is Nina," she answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, a bit too calm. "Ms. Belden, this is Special Agent Jared Lindley with the U.S. Marshal Service. We've been informed that your court may be the target of coordinated disruption efforts. We recommend heightened internal security starting tomorrow morning." Nina didn't panic, but she did stand up, close her office door, and pull the blinds. Disruption as in threats? More like orchestrated interference. A few phone calls, anonymous complaints, paperwork floods, maybe someone showing up pretending to be press. Nina nodded slowly. "Has this happened elsewhere?" There was a pause. "Everywhere," Lindley said. At the same time, a handful of federal judges, including Boasberg, were quietly coordinating calls and drafting a private memo. They weren't strategizing for retaliation. They were trying to figure out how to preserve trust in the courts without further inflaming things. In that circle was Judge Elaine Rosenthal, based in Phoenix. sharp, methodical, and known for her long memory. She reminded the others about a moment in 2006 when federal judges faced pressure during the immigration reform era. How silence back then made things worse, not better. But Boasberg was firm. If we start acting like politicians, we lose everything. Rosenthal didn't argue, but she wasn't convinced silence was still an option. They agreed on one thing: they needed someone outside the robe to speak for them. That someone turned out to be Harold Beechman, the retired prosecutor from Flagstaff. A few days after watching Musk's comments, he wrote a column. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just a measured letter published in a regional legal journal titled "Why Judges Must Remain Boring." The piece was shared, reposted, cited in academic circles, and then, somehow, found its way onto a primetime news panel. Beechman, quiet as ever, ended up on screen across from Bryce Lennox. "You're defending a system that's been hijacked by elitists," Bryce said. "People like Boasberg are unelected, unaccountable, and hiding behind robes." Beechman waited a beat. "You know what else is unelected and unaccountable?" he asked. "A billionaire with 180 million followers who can smear someone's name without ever stepping foot in a courtroom." The panel went silent, and suddenly the battle had a new dimension: the courtroom versus the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Musk wasn't backing off. Inside a sleek glass conference room at one of his SpaceX offices, he met with two former congressional aides turned legal consultants. He wore a gray hoodie, leaned forward with a tablet in hand, and scrolled through a list of articles. "Every major ruling that's blocked reform in the past 5 years. Look at the pattern. It's the same handful of judges protecting the same old system," he said. One of the aides, a woman named Joy Cransford, replied, "If you push for impeachment, it'll take over the headlines again." "Good," Elon said. "Let people see how broken the system is. Sometimes you don't fix a machine, you replace it." "But what if the machine is the last thing keeping the chaos out?" she asked. He looked up, paused, and said flatly, "Then maybe chaos is overdue." That line leaked 2 days later. Back in Topeka, Nina Belden arrived at work the next morning to find two protesters parked across the street from the courthouse. They weren't shouting, just standing there with signs that read, "Unelected power is tyranny and judges don't rule us." Her security guard, Lewis, nodded to her as she walked in. "Think they'll stay long?" "I don't know," she said, "but they'll grow. You can feel it." He looked back out the glass doors. "Hope we're ready." But readiness wouldn't matter much, not with what was about to hit the country's legal system square in the chest. All it would take was one confrontation, one bad decision, one spark, and it was coming. It happened in Sacramento. A quiet Thursday morning turned chaotic when a man stormed the lobby of the Robert T. Matsuiya U.S. Courthouse with a bullhorn in one hand and a folded flag in the other. His name was Cale Brimley, a former Navy engineer from Modesto, father of two, recently laid off. His message? Simple, loud, and chilling. "They've hijacked our country, our laws, our voices. I'm not leaving until someone explains why judges are protecting criminals." Court staff evacuated the building. Marshals approached carefully, but Cale wasn't armed, just angry. He demanded a meeting with the chief judge. He wanted cameras. He wanted to be heard. For 3 hours, he sat alone in the marble entryway, refusing to budge. The footage went viral before the police even arrived. By that evening, 24 protesters had gathered outside the courthouse. Most were peaceful, but a few came with batons and face coverings. One man threw a brick at the glass doors, missed, but barely. The courthouse closed indefinitely. Judge Michael Sheridan, a longtime federal judge in Sacramento, made a rare public statement that night from his home via live stream. "I will not resign, I will not stay silent, and I will not be intimidated. This court belongs to the people, but it does not answer to threats." That speech, sincere, tired, defiant, was shared everywhere. It gave some people hope. It terrified others. In a loft apartment in Cincinnati, Ohio, Camille York, the teacher from Hattiesburg, watched the live stream on her phone, her heart pounding. She hadn't been able to sleep since the Sacramento standoff. It wasn't just about Musk anymore. It was bigger. It was unraveling. She opened her group chat with fellow teachers across the country and typed, Anyone else feel like we're watching the guardrails come off? Dozens of replies came in, some sarcastic, some scared. One simply said, "This is what happens when truth becomes optional." Back in Washington, pressure was mounting on lawmakers to take a stance. Elon Musk had stayed publicly quiet since the Sacramento courthouse lockdown. But behind the scenes, he was making moves. Lobbyists from multiple tech firms were reportedly meeting with sympathetic senators, floating ideas like term limits for federal judges and restructuring lower courts altogether. Senator Glenn Warfield introduced a bill within days, the Judicial Accountability and Review Act, a sweeping proposal that would force lifetime appointed judges to undergo biannual public review panels. It had little chance of passing, but it didn't have to pass. It just had to exist. And it did. The media lost its mind. Some pundits celebrated it. Finally, one anchor said, a system that checks the unchecked. Others warned of chaos. This isn't oversight, another countered. This is intimidation through legislation. In a dusty diner in Omaha, Nebraska, a man named Vincent Kelter watched the news in silence. He was in his 60s, wore the same oil-stained cap he'd worn since his truck driving days. Across from him sat his granddaughter, Morgan, a freshman pre-law student. "You think this is how it all falls apart?" she asked. Vincent didn't look up from his coffee. "No," he said, "it's how people forget what kept it together in the first place." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. And then, just when it seemed like the air couldn't get any thicker, a new headline broke. Anonymous threat sent to 13 federal judges across 6 states. The letter warned of public trials and consequences for betrayal. It was vague, written in block letters, mailed from Ohio, Texas, and Idaho. The Department of Justice held a quiet emergency summit. Private calls were made to every federal judge in the country. Additional protection was authorized for 42 individuals. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was real. And for the first time in years, veteran judges were quietly asking themselves, was it still worth it? But amid the threats, the anger, and the headlines, someone unexpected was about to step forward. Not a politician, not a billionaire, just a woman with a name, a history, and a story that couldn't be ignored. Her name was Nadine Ellory. Not famous, not powerful, not rich. Just a 62-year-old retired public defender from Fort Wayne, Indiana, who had spent her career handling cases no one else wanted. Drug charges, illegal evictions, domestic abuse. The kind of work that earned no awards, just worn shoes and a full heart. Nadine wasn't planning to speak out. She hadn't practiced law in over 5 years. But something about the headlines, Musk's posts, the courthouse lockdowns, the protests, wouldn't let her rest, so she wrote. It wasn't meant to go viral, just a 5-minute video she filmed in her living room. Her old law books stacked behind her, a faded wooden cross on the wall. She sat upright, staring into the camera. "I've stood in front of a lot of judges. Some were tough, some were cold, a few were just plain wrong. But you know what they all had in common? They showed up, day after day, hearing hard cases, making harder decisions, knowing someone would always be angry." She paused. "And now we want to scare them out of doing their job? We want to call them traitors because we don't like how they ruled?" She shook her head slowly. "You don't fix a system by burning it down. You fix it by remembering what it was built for and who it's supposed to protect." Nadine clicked upload and didn't think about it again, until her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Within 48 hours, the video had reached 3 million views. Cable news shows replayed it. Editorials quoted it. A major podcast called it the voice of reason in a sea of madness. Even a few conservative outlets, who had been fiercely critical of the courts, acknowledged its sincerity. But what really made the difference was who shared it next. Elon Musk. He reposted the video with a short caption. "I disagree with her, but I respect her." That changed everything. Inside a federal courthouse in Albuquerque, Judge Tyrus Mendelson sat in silence watching the video on his laptop. His clerk stood just outside the room pretending not to listen. Tyrus had been considering early retirement. He'd written the letter, signed it, even picked a date. But after hearing Nadine's words, he slowly folded the letter in half, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. Later that day, he called his law clerks into his chambers. "We're not going anywhere," he said, "not while it still matters." Meanwhile, in Washington, something unusual happened. A bipartisan group of senators, Democrats and Republicans, met behind closed doors, not to vote, not to posture, but to talk. One of them, Senator Miles Harrigan from Wisconsin, broke the tension with a single line. "We can't keep pretending this is just a blip. We've got billionaires, protesters, and death threats all aimed at the same place, the courts. If that doesn't scare you, you're not paying attention." They didn't agree on everything, not even close. But they agreed on one thing: the courts couldn't become the next battlefield. Not if the country was going to stay together. And slowly from that moment on, the tone started to shift. In Philadelphia, a college student who had spent the last 2 weeks posting furious threads about judicial corruption suddenly posted something different. "Just watch Nadine Ellery's video. Maybe I've been too harsh. Maybe we all have. There's a difference between criticism and demolition." Thousands liked it. Camille York, the teacher from earlier, reshared the video with the caption, "Sometimes the voice of wisdom doesn't yell. It just speaks plainly, and we remember it forever." And even Musk, louder than anyone in this whole saga, went quieter. For a few days, he didn't post about judges, or the courts, or the system. He turned his attention back to tech, rockets, infrastructure. Not surrender, not silence, just pause. But every pause ends. And when it does, the real question is never what happened, but what we learned. 2 weeks later, the protests died down. Not completely. There were still angry tweets, still angry segments on late-night cable. But the fire had dimmed. The country hadn't solved anything really. Just stepped back from the edge. For now, Nadine Ellery returned to her quiet life in Fort Wayne. The media requests kept coming, but she declined them all. She didn't want to become a symbol. She just wanted people to think, to feel something more than anger. That was enough for her. And in Washington, Judge Boasberg continued his work. No statement, no interviews. He kept showing up, reviewing cases, writing opinions. He understood what came with the job now more than ever, and he wore it like armor. As for Musk, he moved on to new ventures, new ideas. But something had shifted. He had seen the power of his voice when aimed at the fragile walls of democracy. Whether he'd use it again like that, no one could say for sure. But what stuck with people most wasn't Musk, or Roberts, or Boasberg. It was the feeling they were left with, the uncomfortable question: what happens when the people we count on to stay neutral become targets? And an even bigger one: what happens when those who protect the system need protection themselves? In Pueblo, Colorado, the same diner where those two men argued weeks ago was quiet again. Adriana, the waitress, poured coffee for a woman sitting alone with a laptop. It was Kayla, Polanski's student, now finishing a scholarship essay for a national contest. Her topic? Why courts shouldn't be popular. She didn't write about Musk or protests. She wrote about Nadine, about Judge Mendelson, about the way institutions feel invisible until they aren't. She wrote, "Judges don't always get it right, but we need them to be brave enough to try, even when it makes us angry, especially then." That essay would later go viral, not because it was flashy, but because it said something we rarely say aloud. It's easy to destroy trust. It's harder to build it, and harder still to rebuild it once it's gone. So what now? Maybe nothing dramatic, maybe no sweeping reforms, no overnight change. Maybe it starts with paying closer attention, with asking better questions, with understanding that power, whether it sits in a robe or a rocket lab, should always come with responsibility. Because when influence goes unchecked on the bench or online, everything gets distorted. Truth, process, justice. And sometimes all it takes to remind us what really matters is the voice of someone who lived it quietly for years, and then spoke up at just the right moment. So if you're watching this and wondering what your role is in all of this, it's simple. Hold your opinions, but hold your principles tighter. Be loud when it counts, but be fair. Be curious. Ask why, not just what. And never let frustration replace reason. Because the moment we stop believing in the value of honest judgment, of laws shaped by arguments, not outrage. We lose something we won't easily get back. And if you think this story matters, if it made you think or feel or question anything at all, leave a comment, share your thoughts, hit like, subscribe. Let's keep this conversation alive while we still can.